suicide behind the back, an expertly aimed shot in the neck, and the fall into a huge mass grave. These people were not killed by the Nazis. They were killed by one of the Allies, the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was killing people in this way for many years, both before and after it joined the Allies. These victims had no memorials. They were buried in anonymous mass graves. The murderer's power that killed them, and the powers that collaborated with the murderer, were never actually prepared to talk about them. The memory of millions of innocent victims was erased from history. Soviet society was the first communist society on Earth. It was a huge social experiment.
Initially, when communists come to power, and that doesn't matter where, let it be in Russia, in Poland, in Cuba, in Nicaragua, it doesn't matter, in China. Initially, they destroy about 10% of population, and that's very specific. This is used not just to kill enemies, they're not enemies, it's to restructure the fabric of society. It's a social engineering. Top intellectuals, best workers, best engineers, they would kill them all. And then they will try to restructure the new society.
Hang at least 100 kulaks, execute the hostages, do it in such a way that people for hundreds of miles around will see and tremble. Lenin. In 1917, the communists seized power. Lenin now had a chance to apply Marxism to real life.
Those who resisted were shot. There were terrible massacres against resisting peasants. And again, nobody knows exactly how many people died, but we're talking about 10 million or more.
В 30-е годы была заведена отработана вся эта технология расстрелов и убийств. Значит, практически каждая область, вот административная область, имела свою зону, где, значит, захоранивали этих расстрелянных.
The shooting itself was carried out in prisons. In the basements there were special shooting chambers with concrete walls and with a runnel to channel blood.
Человека вели по коридору там, в красный уголок. В красном уголке последнее, значит, сличение персональных данных. Он должен был назвать свою фамилию, имя, отчество. Вот потом, значит, его выводили, заводили в эту комнату. И как только он переступал там порог, он получал выстрел в затылок из пистолета.
Yes, people were killed by a bullet in the head. We know that usually they were killed by bunches of, well, between 100 and sometimes, well, several hundreds every, well, night.
Then the corpses were loaded onto trucks, driven out of towns and buried in nearby forests and parks. This is Bukivina forest near Kiev. The elderly people will never forget the trucks which were driving here during the night. Blood was dripping from them en route. Only after 50 years the relatives were allowed to come here. They created this memorial where monuments are trees. Each tree in this forest is banded with a scarf in memory of the innocent victims who were brutally murdered and dumped into mass graves here. Bukivina, Butovo, Leningrad, Vinnytsia, Kharkov. Mass graves littered the whole country. Deportations, executions and torture became the post-war reality for millions of people. Concentration camps were scattered throughout both Europe and Siberia. In many of them, horrific medical experiments were performed on humans. In Butugicag camp in Magadan, the KGB used thousands of prisoners as guinea pigs, experimenting with the human brain. Many of these prisoners were still alive during the experiments. All of this happened after Nazism was defeated and memorials made to its victims. The victims of the Soviet death camps were buried in numbered graves. There is no memorial here, just a pile of the shoes of murdered victims, children's shoes among them. Feeling complete impunity, the post-war KGB terrorized the population, letting loose their most beastly instincts. This was drawn by a KGB prison guard who had served for 33 years in the Soviet interior system. He was depicting his routine, everyday life. Who were these men? Who were doing these atrocities? Meet one of them. The notorious Yanis Dzintars. A KGB interrogator in the Soviet-occupied Latvia, he was particularly famous for his brutality towards women. The victims' testimonies paint an horrific picture of his interrogations. Female victims were beaten and tortured by several KGB officers continuously for 20 hours. Not everyone could endure it. The wife of Ernest Waltman, Veronika, was beaten and tortured by Dzintars and his drunk colleagues for 4 days. She finally committed suicide by hanging herself in the prison cell. When the Soviet Union collapsed, Dzintars fled to Russia. The Kremlin refuses to extradite him, calling him an honorable veteran. With the hands of these KGB veterans, the Soviet Union terrorized and tortured innocent people. They were the ones who guarded death camps, where millions were exterminated and thousands used in horrific medical experiments. Many of these death camp veterans are still alive.
And I don't think the world, certainly Europe, has never seen that sort of murderous killing, either in numbers or in nature.